Wednesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you're having a good afternoon. Browns coming out of the bye week, back at work in Berea, getting ready for the New Orleans Saints. Kevin Stefanski met with the media today, talked about what the Browns learned from their self-scout.
A lot. Not going to share all the specifics with you, but I would tell you, Jeff, the players understand the areas that we want to improve upon. There's a lot of things that we feel like we can do better. Some of them are very small, detail, footwork type things. Some of them are big picture, schematic things, but you work hard to identify items that you feel like your players can improve upon.
Now let's welcome in Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Tim, 2-7, nobody likes it, and there's a lot they can improve on, particularly on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you go up against the Saints team this week that's, has struggled on that side of the football. They took a step back on defense. I'll talk about that later in the show. But after that, you got Steelers, Broncos, Steelers within those next three games. So obviously it's going to be a more difficult test for this offense. But you would have to imagine with the time to scout, with time to get more guys healthy after the bye, you would imagine that Sunday in New Orleans has the potential to be one of the better offensive showings of the season, especially coming off the problems they had against the Chargers about a week and a half ago.
So Kevin Stefanski also asked some news earlier this week relative to Jedrick Wills. Used the term business decision with the reason he didn't play against the Ravens. Kevin Stefanski addressed that.
I talked to Jed. It was a poor choice of words. I know the connotation of business decision. That's not how he meant it. Did not feel like he was near 100% to help us. But poor choice of words, and he understands that.
The Jed's not healthy a year later. I mean, has it just been? Was there a setback?
I wouldn't categorize it as setback. It hasn't recovered how quickly he would want it to, and there's obviously times that you maybe tweak an injury or you feel it again and those type of things. But, it's been a tough rehab for him.
And Tim, the one thing about Jedrick Wills, when he's healthy, he's probably an average left tackle in the NFL. When he's not healthy, when he's banged up, and I don't mean completely injured, I mean banged up, he's not a good left tackle. And if you can't play banged up in the NFL, as a lineman, you probably can't play in the NFL.
Yeah, I think what you said, just, when you say it like that, it makes Joe Thomas's consecutive snap streak all the more remarkable, that you could play through so many, minor tweaks and injuries or whatever, and really not even miss a snap, but still really not even go down in quality as far as the reps were all those years ago. And considering how much more physical the NFL has become, how much faster the game has become, how much bigger, stronger, faster the players have become in the past few years, injuries are inevitable. So if you're not able to just play through that, if you can't play through small nicks and bruises, you're going to have problems. And I think Jedrick Wills, we've seen that struggling to come back from the knee injury. He had those issues. I think, with what Kevin Stefanski said about the poor choice of words, I think, certainly what maybe some people think of business decision compared to what others think of it as, obviously it didn't sound good coming from Jedrick Wills, but, it's just a thing with, I think you understand that he wasn't 100. I think everybody understands he wasn't 100%, and that's why he didn't play. But at the end of the day, in the NFL, 10 games in a season, nobody's 100%. It's who can play through those, bumps and bruises over the course of a season that tells you who the great players really are, and if the great ones can play through less than ideal circumstances.
All right. So Tony Rizzo, ESPN Cleveland, talked about how he would fix the Browns.
What would you do right now if you were the Browns? Give me a general game plan of how you would go about fixing this team. Believe it or not, I am not going to clean house. I am not. Although Vrabel is very tempting to me. Very. I am going to keep the current regime one more year. Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. I'm going to bring Watson in to compete for a job in training camp because I don't think we can get out from under it. I would hire I'd call Bill Parcells. I call everybody. I want the best quarterback in this draft, or the one that I think will fit the best with my team.
Again, you got to tell me where they're drafting, because if you're drafting anywhere outside of the top 4 or 5, you're not getting the top quarterback. And I don't see anybody in this draft class that I feel is a can't miss. And I'd bring in I'd find the next Sam Darnold or the next, for lack of a better term, Baker Mayfield, guys that haven't performed. And I know Baker Mayfield's team's now 4-6, but he's better than he was when he left here, without question. And I'd do that until I find a quarterback that I think works.
Yeah, and I keep thinking about this 25 NFL draft. Everybody's looking up at Shedeur Sanders as the number 1 quarterback. To me, he's not better than Caleb Williams. He's not better than Jane Daniels. You can argue he's maybe only slightly worse than Drake May. That said, if he's there at the top of the draft, I'd still take him. I just love the intangibles he has, the accuracy. Not the greatest arm, but good, more than good enough. He's accurate. I keep talking about the clutch factor. I think that matters when it comes to playing quarterback. You have to be able to handle those things, and you have to be able to win in those big final moments. And I think that's where Shedeur Sanders can excel. But I agree with Tony when it comes to the big changes. I wouldn't make a lot of changes right now. Yeah, this has been kind of a Murphy's Law type of season where everything's kind of fallen apart, particularly the offense. The coaching staff changes haven't worked out. Deshaun Watson did not look good before his ruptured Achilles, and you really kind of have to keep him on the roster, at least for one more season, even if you don't play him in 2025. Question then is, where do you go at quarterback? Do you stick around with Jameis Winston and use your high draft pick to add much needed young offensive talent at the top of this football team? Or do you take the gamble on Shedeur Sanders? Do you trade up for him, or do you hope that you can tap into the potential of Cam Ward, even though the warts in his game has showed up the last few weeks, particularly against Georgia Tech? And I said last week when I talked about him, you don't want to suppress Cam Ward. You want to harness what he has and make it work. But those concerns are still there, and that's why it feels like he's falling further away in this draft class than Shedeur. But that said, yeah, I would keep the status quo just one more season and see if you can turn things around in 2025.
I would agree, and I understand the appeal of Vrabel. If you make a change off Kevin Stefanski, you're looking for different. Mike Vrabel is kind of he's not warm and fuzzy, he's not cerebral, he's more emotional, and that would be a dramatic change that I know a lot of the fan base wants. Stefanski has performed well in 2 of the 4 years. This has been a disaster. So it's 2 of 5. At some point in time, they got him to mediocre. You got to go from mediocre to consistent playoff team. I said that when they gave him the extension. Year 1, they ain't making the playoffs, and they might be in the top 10 in the draft. Tony Grossi, longtime Browns beat reporter, talked about if he thinks the Browns could fire Kevin Stefanski for Mike Vrabel.
If Vrabel agreed to take this job over any other one, do you think the Hasms would make that move and fire Kevin Stefanski?
I think that's to be determined. I'm not confident to say they would do that right now.
Well, what do you need to see, Tone? It's been 5 years. What do you need to see?
Well, he's had 2 good years out of 4, and 2 not so good years. But this is the worst of the 5. So you got to decide who's mostly responsible for this mess, this year's mess. And I don't think it's him. They might disagree, but
right.
Again, I'll repeat what I constantly say. Stefanski does his job better than Andrew Berry does his job. Mm-hmm. So why would you fire the coach?
Tony, worst case scenario for Kevin is the Browns win 3 games?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And would you think
3-14?
You think it would be an automatic?
Yeah, I think so. At that point, I mean, think about it. You're talking about 1-6 from this point on. Or 1-7. 1-7.
And Tim, that I'm sure that will factor into it. What is it you expected to contend for an AFC championship this year? What is the final record? And I get it. When you are this bad, everything's on the table. I will say the error in this, and I was all for it, was trying to build an offense around Deshaun Watson. You probably had to do that because of the $230 million guaranteed that he's due. It hasn't worked. Do not trot this offense back out. It's not good.
Yeah, obviously something with that I think is going to have to change going into 2025. But when I look at, in particular, getting to Mike Vrabel and that idea, obviously, what Mike Vrabel did in Tennessee, you can't ignore that. Obviously, riding Derrick Henry to an AFC Championship game, and they got exposed when Ryan Tannehill couldn't keep up with Patrick Mahomes in the AFC title game. But Vrabel got a lot out of not a lot, and I do think his temperament and his style, it's kind of the textbook old school AFC North type of coach you would be kind of looking for. I feel like he's more new school than a lot of people realize, particularly when it comes to certain decision-making aspects, fourth down, things like that. I think he's more nuanced than, he comes across. And certainly I would imagine after this season, he and Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson might be the two most talked about guys for head coaching jobs around the NFL, considering how good the Lions have looked. So if for the Browns, it comes down to whether you think you can upgrade from Kevin Stefanski, who, again, as Tony Grossi said, he's had 2 good seasons out of 5, 2 good, 2 mediocre, and this one obviously being bad. And if you decide Vrabel would have made this team better, then you make that move. But again, 2-7, with all the things that gone on, I don't think you can put on really any one person. I think it's been a collective issue throughout this entire season. And I think really everybody that's part of it has a hand in what has gone wrong for this team.
All right, Tim Bielik and I are going to go to break. Before we take that break, some news and notes from the Browns. They did make a roster move today. They signed cornerback Chingoze Anuksiam. Easy for me to say, huh? From the Commanders' practice squad, undrafted rookie has spent the entire offseason on Washington's practice squad. They signed him to the 53-man roster, so they get a depth piece at cornerback, which they may need going forward. Tim Bielik and I can step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE. I'll be right back.
I just picked up all the Ohio Lottery holiday scratch-offs.
They're multiplying.
Yeah, multiplying. With the chance to multiply my prize by 200 times with holiday bonus millions.
No, they're multiplying.
Oh, you're in a daze.
A holidays.
Snap out of it. Because even if we don't win instantly, all the holiday games offer a second chance to win up to 1,000 times the price of the ticket.
Wait, did you say up to 1,000 times?
Sure did.
We continue talking Browns with Tim Bielik from the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
My name's Joseph. I'm from Buffalo, New York. Lifelong Browns fan, approximately 55 years. I'm so disappointed with this season and the way things are going, all the dissension and so on. And I can't help but think, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but if we had Baker Mayfield sit out that 21 season and started fresh in 22, it would have been 5 years with Stefanski as his offensive coordinator. And I only think that we would have accelerated with him, and things would have been so much better if we had that, and also all our draft picks. So I think this regime needs to be overhauled for a bunch of different reasons, and I wouldn't mind if Mike Vrabel was hired as head coach. I know you got to get a GM first, but I don't know, maybe bring back John Dorsey.
We'll get into that a little bit later relative to Dorsey. A lot of people want to talk about John Dorsey. We'll do that a little later in the show. Tim, Baker Mayfield is playing better. I will give people that. It wasn't going to happen here. And the relationship between he and Kevin Stefanski deteriorated. Mayfield wanted to try to play through that. He wanted to try to get a long-term deal, and it didn't work out. He wasn't going to be the player that he is now if he stayed with the Browns. I am confident in saying that without question.
I agree with you, and there's a big reason why. His name is Mike Evans. we talked about it before the show. Mike Evans is probably going to be a Hall of Fame receiver at some point. I mean, we talked about it before the show that, does Johnny Manziel win his Heisman Trophy if he doesn't have Mike Evans those 2 seasons at Texas A&M? And the Browns simply didn't have a receiver in the Mike Evans stratosphere. And with Mike Evans going down the last couple of weeks with his injury, you see that the effect that has on Baker Mayfield. He just hasn't been as good the last couple of weeks. Obviously, he had a great 2023 season. I'm not trying to take anything away from that. Great for him that he won a playoff game, and he had the Buccaneers within striking distance of beating the Lions in Detroit in the divisional playoff. But just he's kind of proven that he's a quarterback that you can win with, but not necessarily because of. There's nothing wrong with that, but if you're trying to win a Super Bowl, the best way to do it is to have a quarterback that you win because of. And I just don't know if Baker Mayfield is that guy. He's better, but I just don't know if he's into that tier yet.
And again, young guy playing better, good for him. All right, Jameis Winston talked about what the Browns need to do moving forward, as well as how to get that run game going.
One reason is when you're studying the running back position, it starts with the front, right? And our front has been banged up from time to time. We just got one of the best running backs in the league, back. So I think just everyone developing a synergy, right, and us all gelling and working together, that's what leads to a great, efficient run game. Right, and Nick is getting healthy. Jerome, Pierre, and Dr. Foreman, they did a great job. But at times we were in games where we had to throw the ball more, right? So I think us staying ahead of the sticks, being efficient, will allow our running game to continue to pick up and continue to increase. One play at a time. We cannot fall victim to what's behind us. We cannot press too far to what's ahead of us. We have to focus on one day, one play, executing it perfectly, one play at a time.
Tim, the thing that I like least about this scheme is the offense and the offensive line have lost their identity with being physical. That's one of the reasons I want them to move off of this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously what Jameis Winston was talking about with the offensive line not being healthy, I mean, we've seen that all season. I mean, just think of all the different line combinations that they've had to throw out there at times this season. I mean, I don't know how many different offensive linemen they've had to start at some point this season. It just seems like it's been a revolving door up front, and you're not going to have a lot of success up front if you have that revolving door at running back on the offensive line. And then even just looking at the stats, it's not that they're not. It's not just that they're not running the football. It's that they don't run the football. Again, 27th in rushing attempts. They're third in passing attempts. Probably because part of what James was talking about is you fall behind and you kind of have to throw. And in some ways also in this modern NFL, I was thinking about this. Greg Olsen said this way back, in 2020 when the Browns were playing the Cowboys. He said this a bunch of games. In the modern NFL, you throw to set up the run. And so that's kind of what's going on. That's kind of a little bit what the issue is. I mean, with Nick Chubb, we know the significant knee injury he's coming back from. Obviously, it's very significant. Just to get him out there the last 2 games, it's been good to see. You would have to assume that the last 3 games, that as time goes on, the further he gets away from the injury, the stronger he gets, the more confident he gets in handling contact. Now he comes back from it. You would assume his best football is ahead of him this season. But you would have to, with the Browns, if you want to have any kind of success going forward, win a handful of games this year and try and finish the season out strong, you have to have overhauled a lot of things, I think, in the run game to really get that going.
All right, before we go to break, ranking the top 25 free agents for 2025 next year. 2 of them that stand out. Number 8, Sam Darnold, 2024 salary $10 million. Age entering 2025, he'll be 28. Has completed 68.6% of his throws, 17 touchdowns, tied for 4th in the league. Decision-making can still be questioned here. Has thrown at least 1 interception in 7 of 9 games. 18th on the list, Justin Fields, 2024 salary, $3.2 million. He will only be 26, 6 starts with the Steelers. Improved footwork, vision, and pocket presence, 66.3% completion percentage, 5 touchdowns, 1 interception. Also rushed for 231 yards, 5 more touchdowns. He's a guy that, the dual threat guy. Whenever people have asked me about him, I'd like to see him play better from the pocket. Again, I would bring in any and all of these guys, and I'm not opposed to having Deshaun Watson in there trying to compete for it, because you're going to have to pay him. But I would not give the job to anybody.
No, I agree. 2025, you don't know exactly what you're going to have a quarterback, and it's very unlikely you're going to find that Jaden Daniels type in this draft. I mean, I think we do have to brace for the potential that, as much as I'm a big Shedeur Sanders guy, there is the potential that there just isn't that guy in 2025, that there isn't that guy who's going to, have that breakout season and be offensive rookie of the year, light the league up, lead his team to the playoffs, potentially win a playoff game and all those sorts of things like CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels have done the last 2 seasons. So the next best thing he could do is have a quarterback competition. And of these 2 guys, I feel like I like Justin Fields more. I think we saw him play some of his best football with the Steelers. Obviously, I don't think they had the best offensive talent. I think, with their similar, maybe the Browns, I think, have more offensive talent, maybe a little less because after the Amari Cooper trade. But I think with the Steelers, their scheme is more sound than the Browns right now. I think that's what has allowed Fields to succeed. They've really kept things simple and very smart for him. And we know Kevin Stefanski's offense is very quarterback friendly. So I'd imagine Fields would be a good fit there, especially if you're able to re-engineer the run game and rebuild that going into next offseason. I would much rather have him than Sam Darnold, because I look at what Darnold has done, and at the beginning of the season, it was a great story with Sam Darnold, but 5 interceptions in between his last 2 games. I wonder how much kind of the shine is kind of worn off on Sam Darnold. I know the Vikings are still great this year. I think that's due in large part to just how awesome their defense is and how great Justin Jefferson is more than anything.
Tim Bielik and I can step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
I'm calling from Columbus, Ohio. I've got a comment. As far as Andrew Berry, DePodesta, and Stefanski, they've got to go. I mean, go now. DePodesta and Berry have ruined the Browns for years. They're a couple of hacks. I don't know who that English guy was on your program, but he has no idea what the hell he was talking about. Get Berry and DePodesta out of there. You got Mike Vrabel sitting right there in Cleveland. Haslam has got to make him the head coach, and then go out and beg John Dorsey to come back. If not John Dorsey, get somebody who knows what in the heck they're doing. That's all I got. Thank you.
Appreciate all the calls. Now, everybody has revisionist history with John Dorsey. This is his second draft when he did not have the 1st and 4th picks in the draft. Greedy Williams, not in the league. Sione Takitaki, decent. Sheldrick Redwine, Mac Wilson, Austin Seibert, Drew Forbes. That's his second draft. And this is the guy that hired Freddie Kitchens and died on the Freddie Kitchens hill when he refused to fire him. So, Tim, he was good. Nick Chubb was a great pick. I'm not saying that wasn't. I didn't, the Baker Mayfield pick, retrospect, should have been Josh Allen. He did take Nick Chubb. He took Austin Corbett in there before Nick Chubb. So he has made some really bad picks. He is a talent evaluator, not a GM. He is evaluating talent. He's like the scout, the senior scout for the Lions. He is not the GM. He is not making decisions.
Yeah, I think we talked about this before. The idea, when you're 2-7, you think about revisionist history. And I'm even looking back at the 2018 draft. Yeah, he obviously made great picks. John Dorsey made great picks with Denzel Ward and Nick Chubb. But the Austin Corbett pick, when you have all day to think about it, the first pick in the 2nd round, and you pick Austin Corbett, big swing and a miss. And if you're taking like Shaq Leonard or Braden Smith after that, all of a sudden you're talking about a truly generational draft. And even after that, he got nothing after the 2nd round. Chad Thomas, four total sacks in the NFL. Antonio Callaway, basically one season, and just nothing as far as depth goes. And obviously 2019, that year, outside of Sione Taki, big swing and a miss there. I think we're talking about it because John Dorsey's now with the Detroit Lions. And yeah, the Lions are awesome right now. They've turned around, but I think what we have to understand about the Detroit Lions is they've hit at the draft at an unsustainable rate. I think I've seen the term Linsanity run of drafting used for the Detroit Lions, obviously referring to Jeremy Lin, the former, point guard for the Knicks, who was awesome for a couple of weeks and parlayed that into a very long NBA career. But the way they hit in their draft picks, it's almost impossible to keep doing that at such a high level, which is why what the Lions are doing, I think it's more amazing than anything. And I just don't know how much you can really take out of that other than, John Dorsey obviously had a hand in it, but I think it's also Brad Holmes coming from the Rams. They're a very good drafting team. They found a lot of gems, in the Les Snead era. Certainly, I think that plays as much of a part as anything. Obviously, you're not going to get Brad Holmes out of Detroit. Maybe you can take pieces out of that staff, other team staff, if you decide you want to move on. But again, I feel like we're looking too much at trying to blow things up on just one bad season. Yes, it's a bad season, but it's also one season. When you look at the previous 4 seasons, this team, 4 of the best seasons this team's had since 1999, the first playoff win since 1994. Obviously, they've fallen short of expectations, but I just chalk it up to, you did not get good enough quarterback play. These coaching staff changes you made on offense didn't work. I don't see that as cause for, blowing things up, maybe a year too early, when you could just take another year, see if Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski can dig their way out of this. And if they can't, then you move on and find a new GM and coach in 2026.
Yeah. And the other thing is, Andrew Berry has not, the draft picks haven't worked out well, but he hasn't been drafting at the top of the draft. Now, if you want to look at it, he's missed on all his first-round picks because it would be Jedrick Wills, Deshaun Watson. So I get that line of thinking, but again, you can go and pick apart every GM's drafts. There are plenty of misses. Now, John Dorsey did identify good football players. That I am not saying. But as a general manager, he wasn't very good. I mean, he mismanaged the cap. There are a number of places at all of his stops where he has not been a great GM. That's why he's a talent evaluator now and not a GM.
And you forget, sorry to interrupt, I was going to say you forgot 2 other things. The Odell Beckham trade in 2019, and more egregious than I think people realize, not firing Hugh Jackson after 0-16 2017.
Yeah, and again, refusing to fire Freddie Kitchens when they wanted to, which is why they eventually moved on from him. All right, before we go, 3 things to know about the Saints. I know you wrote an article about it. Saints a different team than they were at the start of the season. Defense has taken steps back in 2024 injuries, testing the Saints' depth at the skill position. So take us through those.
Well, number one, talking about how the Saints are a far different team now than the start of the season. Most times we say that in good context. This time we're not. Because when the Saints started the season, they were 2-0. They scored a combined 91 points in the first 2 games of the season. They went to Dallas the week after. The Cowboys blew out the Browns, and the Saints blew out the Cowboys. And everybody's thinking, man, the Saints look good now. And then they end up on this 7-game losing streak. In the last 8 games, they've scored just 136 points. Derek Carr, who I thought has played pretty solid football, hasn't been great, but has been okay. Misses 3 games. Spencer Rattler, a 5th-round rookie out of South Carolina, has to start those games. They score 3 games. They score a combined 45 points. So, obviously, Derek Carr, solid quarterback, but he's not a world beater. That said, the fact that this offense completely collapsed from the start of the season, it looked good at the beginning, but obviously it has not gone in a good direction. Number 2, going to the other side of the football, the defense. Brown's going to see a familiar face on the other side in Joe Woods, the defensive coordinator for the Saints. Obviously, he came to New Orleans in 2023. I thought he did a very good job. They were 8th in scoring defense in 2023, but obviously the bottom's kind of fallen out of that defense. Heading into their Sunday game against the Falcons, which they won, the Saints were 25th in scoring defense, giving up 25.4 points a game, 27th in pass defense, 28th in rushing defense. And if you include the win against the Falcons, the Saints have allowed at least 350 yards of offense 7 times. And two of the 3 times they didn't, they played the Carolina Panthers, and they lost one of those 2 games against the Panthers. They lost in Carolina. And you're also talking about Saints defense that just traded away Marshawn Lattimore a week ago with the Commanders for the trade deadline. So this is a weak defense that got weaker before the trade deadline. And a big reason why they beat Atlanta, even though they gave up almost about 400 yards of offense, Younghoe Koo missed multiple field goals in that game. So that defense has had issues. And then number 3, injuries testing the Saints depth at the skill positions. When you look at the receiving core, Chris Olave, he's on injured reserve with concussion. He took an awful hit against the Panthers. He had to be carted off the field on a backboard, so he's not going to play in this game. Rashid Shaheed, who was a Pro Bowler in 2023, had a season-ending knee injury. And then to add to that, they have second-year running back Kendre Miller and rookie receiver Bub Means are both on injured reserve. Now, and they were so depleted in the skill position department, they had to sign Marquez Valdez-Scantling in late October off the street. Granted, he had a pretty good game against the Falcons, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns on 3 catches, but just the Saints have just been unfortunately wiped out because of injuries. And obviously, you hope all those guys come back healthy, particularly Olave, because it was an awful hit he took. But it's just what the Saints outside of Alvin Kamara right now just don't have a lot at the skill positions.
And again, Browns obviously at 2-7 need a win, would calm things down a little bit in Berea. Tim Bielik, is always great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Tim.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Have a good day.
Tim Bielik, make sure you check him out. Always good stuff for the Plain Dealer as well as cleveland.com. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Jake Burns from BrownsFilmBreakdown.com straight ahead. Stay with us on Sports4CLE. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, Dave, this is Bob in Chillicothe. I got a question. Drew Petzing, who's the offensive coordinator now out to Arizona, is running Stefanski's offense because he worked with Stefanski for years and is very successful out there. It's just not like a head coach to give up on something he knows it works, which tells me that he was forced to change this thing around on the offense for Watson, and it's a disaster. Do you think there's any way possible we get back to the Stefanski offense? Yeah, it's boring, but it works. Thanks. Love the show. Go Browns. Woof, woof.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Let's welcome in Jake Burns from BrownsFilmBreakdown.com. Jake, I don't know if Kevin Stefanski was forced to. I think they went all in on Watson, so you were trying to maximize Watson. But I would agree, it hasn't worked, and I would certainly expect elements, assuming Kevin Stefanski is the head coach next year, and I think that will happen, I would expect them to go back to that style of offense.
Yeah, probably. I mean, there's elements, I think, of what Ken has done that has worked across variations of the Bills over the years, and certainly intertwining it with what Kevin has done is something I think that they would all agree has not gone as they had hoped or planned to be in place. I mean, if you're considering both of them coming back, I think they continue to work these last 8 games to melt together a lot of how they view things and how they apply things, but it will definitely lean more heavily in the direction of what Kevin has traditionally done, because you just don't have a quarterback that plays with that athletic play style the way that Watson does. And Jameis is just not that type of quarterback in terms of how he can, maybe potentially use his feet as a part of a +1 in the running game, some things like that. So I don't think it's any direct issue or direct criticism of what Ken has done or what Kevin has done. I understand what they were trying to do with Deshaun, but if you're not going to be playing Deshaun, probably as we sit here, I really have a hard time envisioning that coming to fruition again. Then it will look like Kevin's more traditional West Coast with play action staples that we've grown accustomed to outside of what they tried to do a little bit more of this year with Watson.
Yeah, and when I talk to coaches and former coaches and bring up that subject, the answer is you know what you know, so what do you mean by that? It means when something goes wrong, Kevin Stefanski knows how to fix those things in the offense. Right now, they don't appear to have the fixes. And the biggest concern I had is the offensive line play has just deteriorated significantly since they've switched.
Yeah, I think that's something we probably miss on is the, elements of the supporting positions that get accustomed to doing something in one fashion for majority of the, Stefanski's time in Cleveland, and then kind of uprooting that and trying to do something different over the course of the last 8 months or so, right? The biggest thing for the offensive line deterioration, which I don't know has been, is not, let me put it this way, it's not been as bad the last 2 weeks. Some of it is health, because there have been very few instances where the collective has been out there as a whole this season. But some of it is predictable quarterback play. I think with how Deshaun plays and some of the, try to phrase it right, the chaos that he invites does create a bit of a difficult situation for offensive linemen to know how to block for that player, especially when you consider who they've been blocking for a majority of their time in Cleveland, which are more predictable pass drops, predictable spots in the pocket, football coming out in a specific time period. So when you go from that, kind of uproot that to a different style of quarterback play, it can lead to some, issues, right? The issues have been too heavy. I think they haven't played well collectively enough across the board, but the volume of the issues is where I think quarterback style has been something that they have failed to adjust to. And now, does that get better with more reps together? Sure. But as we know now, over 3 years with Deshaun Watson, whether it's suspension or serious injury in 2 straight seasons, they're not getting that time together. So you do lose that ability to have rapport in a way that is built through volume of snaps and experience together, which is another complete and utter hindrance that probably isn't talked about enough, is that, training camp and those issues that you have during the season are rooted from guys not being able to participate in important parts of the lead up process, which we saw a lot of that, right? The offensive tackles weren't around in the preseason, and certainly in training camp, those reps weren't had together. And now, as you see, Watson is out another 9-10 months, that comes with an Achilles injury, and he's a different quarterback coming out of that, the same way he's a different quarterback coming out of the shoulder. You just lose some of that ability, right? And I'm not saying that the offensive line is blameless in this scenario. I don't think they have been good enough collectively, and I certainly don't think the running backs until Nick returned have blocked well enough to help either. But I am interested to see if the trend of better performing offensive line continues into the second half of the season, when again, that pocket style of quarterback who prefers to get rid of the football and of usually a pretty rigid amount of time, it gives them a better ability to predict his landing spot in the pocket, and a better ability to just sync up how they're blocking, what they're doing around him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get where you're going with that. All right. We've said this, and you tweeted this out as well. We saw both ends of the Jameis Winston experience in his 2 starts. The good, 334, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions against the Ravens. The not so good, 235, a touchdown, 3 picks against the Chargers. Most of the yardage in the Chargers was actually in the second half when the Browns were down a significant number in that game. When you look at the video of those 2 games, what jumps out as the biggest difference in Jameis Winston's Chargers, Jameis Winston Ravens?
Yeah, I would say the biggest difference is defensive style of play. The Ravens were a heavy man team, and they blitzed a lot, which can give quarterbacks trouble at times, but it can also give them answers to know with the predictability of where to go with the football, how to get there, and where to, the decision timing that it takes to make some of those throws. Now, again, when a team is playing really sticky man coverage and they're blitzing a lot and making you uncomfortable, I do think that can be really one of the more challenging things for a quarterback. But the Ravens are not in the back half, as we saw Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase give them a lot of issues. They're not as good as they have traditionally been back there. The Chargers are really good. They are well coached and are pretty healthy in the back half of their secondary. Not a bunch of big names, but I do believe they have one of the better young defensive minds in Jesse Minter running that defense, who does a great job of coverage variations. And they were really confusing for the Browns and really good at feeling out concepts the Browns like to run, knowing routes receivers were going to be putting into action. And they were just really prepared and they really executed the game plan. So I don't know that, listen, Jameis missed some throws. There's no doubt about it. It wasn't good, but I think there's a stark difference in the quality of those secondaries. And when you look at those two games and separate them and understand the levels of complexity the quarterback has to delineate between the snap and the throw decision, you can see why the Chargers approach to defense playing a higher volume, one of the highest volume zone coverages, and then being able to mix and match out of those zone coverages in very unique ways. And they like to what's called pattern match. So they're less dropping into grass and more reading out patterns and passing off and communicating. It's an extremely well-coached defense who is clicking at the right time right here, as we've seen them give a bunch of teams issues. And I am just like, the sample size for Jameis needs to grow. And obviously we will hope that he plays the last 8 games and can continue to see more time with his play callers and obviously time with his weapons and offensive line and whatnot. But this has largely been the experience of Jameis, which is a very up and down, uneven, level of performance, or this young man would be starting somewhere with a really large contract. So if he's in the backup role, he's there for a reason. It's because the play is not the level of consistency that it needs to be. You will get extreme highs with him, as we saw with the Ravens game, to an extent. Not a perfect game, but you saw, nice production. And then you will get outcomes like the Chargers game where you can see, okay, I understand why the Bucs didn't feel comfortable making him their long-term guy, or the Saints didn't feel quite comfortable giving him the reins over the last 2 or 3 years. So, listen, Jamie's going to have a nice opportunity the last 8 games. He wants to string together consistency and show that he can do this. But there are concerns from most people who have covered him for a long time that is something that he can put forward. But again, to parse out your original question, Chargers are very good. They're going to play some of the better EPA per down defense you're going to see throughout the entire season. I think Jesse Minter will be a one and done. I believe he's the Ben Johnson, who's the Lions' hot name offensive coordinator. He is going to be that this offseason for somebody sort of in the same vein as Mike McDonald. Both of those guys went through the Michigan defensive coordinator path up into the spots they are now. So Chargers are really good. And the Saints will be an interesting challenge, but I certainly don't think they're anywhere near as competent and consistent as what the Chargers have been defensively. So the Browns will have some chances this weekend to put up points.
All right, this one from Jack Duffin, who we talked to yesterday. Stefanski's move to CEO-type head coach appears to be working, judging by the offensive penalties per game. Free to get hands-on rather than focused on play calling. As a play caller, Browns were almost 6.5 penalties. Non-play caller, 3.5. Again, short sample size, but it is something to keep an eye on. And when the move was made, Jake, I kind of felt it was because of the offensive penalties. You needed somebody to kind of, make sure you weren't getting those ridiculous pre-snap penalties that kept putting you behind the chains.
Yeah, I think you have to be a little careful with that, because if you're judging all of the offensive penalties because a coach can't really stop a holding call or an offensive pass interference or some of the other player action penalties. So I would really break that into procedural or operational stuff, which is something I thought Kevin could give a bolster to with his different approach to the offense, which is the illegal motion, illegal shift, false start stuff. Like, that has gone down some. I think it's such a small sample size of 2 games now, but I do feel like that's in a better place. I can't speak to the entire operation of some of those where the word's probably capricious, a little unpredictable about how a guy is going to, get called for holding or some of those other things. But I think through 2 games, they did have one illegal motion penalty, which was a bummer in the Chargers game on a 3rd down. They hit a 19-yard throw to Cedric Tillman, but Jerry Jeudy was outside the tackle box moving toward the line of scrimmage forward, got called for illegal motion, which is different from the illegal shift issues they had earlier in the year. But that's a topic for a different time. But like, it's been better. Let's see it grow. Let's see the sample size get higher and see if they continue to be a little better there. But they have stopped the delay of game penalties. Those have been better. I think that's certainly something that you would like to focus in on. And it does seem like within series to series, there is a little better communication happening between people in the press box and on the sidelines. And I feel encouraged about that. Right. So again, I'd like to see these last 8 or even half of the 8 and see sort of how that feels collectively. But it has been better in terms of the pull your hair out, silly penalties before a play even starts, which we were all grew really frustrated with and tired of that happening over the course of the first, 7 weeks of the season.
Jake Burns from BrownsFilmBreakdown.com and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. We head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. When we return, stay with us.
I just picked up all the Ohio Lottery holiday scratch-offs.
They're multiplying.
Yeah, multiplying. With the chance to multiply my prize by 200 times with holiday bonus millions.
No, they're multiplying.
Oh, you're in a daze.
A holidays.
Snap out of it. Because even if we don't win instantly, all the holiday games offer a second chance to win up to 1,000 times the price of the ticket.
Wait, did you say up to 1,000 times?
Sure did.
We continue talking Browns with Jake Burns from BrownsFilmBreakdown.com. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Yeah, this is Jim Clark from Portsmouth, Ohio. I've been a Browns fan ever since Bernie was drafted. I don't see why they don't try to go after Justin Fields. He played in a very similar offense at Ohio State and done very well. I think he would be a very, very good fit for Kevin Stefanski's offense, and I think it's something they should pursue. Tell me what you think. Thank you.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Jake, I'm intrigued by Justin Fields. My guess is he'll be available. The concern I have, accuracy out of the pocket is, he's a fantastic athlete, strong arm. Accuracy hasn't been exactly what you would want it to be for a starting quarterback in the NFL.
No, but I think Justin's thing is less. You're right. The accuracy hasn't been good enough, kind of layered all together. But to me, it's been he takes too many negative plays. I think the processing hasn't been the level that many people anticipated it could be. Also can get a little skittish in the face of pressure, which he didn't get a ton of at Ohio State. And then obviously you go to, you go to the Chicago initially and Pittsburgh, and it's a little bit of a higher issue. So, I would say the way to phrase that is I would be open to any and all conversations about quarterbacks of any variety. I mean, Fields is a guy that we thought the Browns could take a chance on bringing in this past offseason when he was dealt for something cheap because it was just another option. Like the Browns have to, whether it's drafting somebody in the first 3 rounds or going after a veteran this offseason, if Jameis proves that he is sort of unable to handle the role, or maybe Dorian Thompson-Robinson gets a little more of an opportunity and he doesn't give you enough confidence, they need to keep swinging at people like Fields who will be free agents and see if they can come up with a solution, almost back your way into a solution, right? I think that's the thing that's happening a little bit with Minnesota, with perhaps Sam Darnold, right? There are a lot of different ways to go about solving this. Seattle did a little bit of that with Geno Smith. I'm not saying the Browns are able to recreate some of those not lucky, but just high variance outcomes that you can get with some of these quarterbacks, but they should not be ruling out a pathway to, veterans they like or young players and rookies that they like. So yeah, Justin's among several this offseason that will be an intriguing set of choices if they are serious about moving on from Watson.
All right, so Browns gave up 27 points to the Chargers. Obviously not good. When you look at how the defense played, it's even more frustrating because there were a couple of meltdowns in, third and longs that are just shouldn't be happening, midway through the regular season. I know you posted a couple of these, so let's take a look at this one breakdown that led to a pretty big play. What do you see with this?
Yeah, it's cover 2 in a 3rd and 21 situation, which I think in theory can be a situation that you feel okay about, but when you have two guys carry vertical on a cover 2 side with what's supposed to be a down corner, or at least the corner is responsible for the flat, then you have to carry with number 1, which is the bottom receiver down there, Denzel Ward, creeping at the bottom of the screen. If both 1 and 2, who is the middleman of that group, go vertical, Denzel has to carry with him. The safety cannot cover both of them simultaneously. It's a tough ask. It's the perfect call to stress the defense, but it still should not result in a corner allowing somebody up the far side of the field to stay uncovered by about 10 yards. I don't like the call. Defensively, they should run a little bit more of like a what I would call cover 6, where they're kind of cutting it into quarters, and cover 2 at the top of the field there into the boundary. But, you still call this with the idea your guys understand that who's the biggest threat to a downfield solution. We can come up and tackle the running back out of the backfield and make it a field goal still, but we cannot allow someone to run past us unfiltered up the sideline, and I think that's a lot of what happened there. So it's a breakdown on Denzel's part. I don't think he wasn't as sharp as he normally is, and you could put that on missing practice for the week, coming back from concussion protocol, among some other factors there. But yeah, that's a corner issue, and I don't also like the conflict that I think that call put them in with Jim Schwartz there.
Yeah, and there were a couple of those where the defense played really well, but those 5 or 6 plays where they had breakdowns, those are what happens in an NFL game. You have to make those plays in those 5 or 6 situations. When you look at the mistakes from the Chargers game defensively, are they easily correctable?
They should be. The second one was another breakdown in communication of what coverage they were in. It seems like Denzel was playing a low corner cover 2 look when everybody else was playing cover 3. So I don't think those should be that hard to figure out. In theory, if we're communicating whatever hand signal or whatever word we use to check into cover 3, those should be pretty fixable. But you hesitate to say, yeah, that's easily solved. I mean, put it this way. I think Joe Woods' approach and usage had more issues with miscommunication than this group has had in the past 2 years with Jim Schwartz. So especially considering I think this game was an outlier with those zone-based miscommunications in terms of assignment, duty, and responsibility. So it should be, it should be something that is easily solvable. But if they're going to push more into zone coverages in certain scenarios, they've got to be better. And I can't sit here and guarantee that's going to be the case, even though you don't see many times where you have 2 massive coverage busts like that in a single game. That was pretty disheartening considering how big of a game that could have been for them to get to 3 and 6. So, it's certainly a pretty big bummer, but I feel like those should be things that they can solve out. It wasn't necessarily something so outlandish that it shouldn't be able to be solved.
Jake Burns from BrownsFilmBreakdown.com and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll do a special teams breakdown that hurt the Browns. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Jake Burns from BrownsFilmBreakdown.com. We just showed you a defense breakdown against Chargers. Another area, it's been a disappointment pretty much all season. Special teams. Seems like every week there's a problem with one or the other issues on the special teams unit. So here's another clip. Take us through this breakdown and what you see here.
Yeah, it's not it's not boxing a play. You're punting toward the sideline to box a player in. So once you turn him back inside right there, your contained men have to filter him into a location. You have Jeff Swaim, 84 there, who just completely misses. You have poor pursuit angles to approach upfield. We're running underneath him, running over top. It's just not good enough all around to like the attention to the minor details right here between 37 and 84 there running outside when they need to be sort of split to keep a guy boxed into the sideline. It is disappointing because we haven't seen the Browns exploit many special teams units, but yet we've seen a kickoff return for a touchdown. We've seen long punt returns on multiple occasions, and on top of some of the special teams penalties. And I don't feel like the Browns are at some supreme disadvantage of talent in the special teams unit. So it comes down to people doing their job and the right players being put into the right places. And I feel like we can, without even knowing the granular details, I don't think it's hard to miss between 84, 37 there, who's in the wrong place to get a guy boxed into that, sideline there. But I just know that this team is losing on the margins, guys. They're losing on the margins of blown coverages, penalties taken, and special teams mishaps. Think about the Bengals game that was separated by one touchdown that ended up being the kickoff return, right? There's several instances of this stuff coming back to really haunt them. I believe they had a punt return touchdown allowed in week 1 as well. So it's just not good enough across the board there. And the NFL is so hard to win between offense and defense alone when you're a failure in special teams, and they haven't even really kicked field goals and extra points that well this year. You start to scratch your head about how did they get to 2-7? Well, here's a pretty big piece of the puzzle. So I think Bubba Ventrone is a fine coach. I just don't think that, I know he would agree with it. They haven't been good enough. And ultimately, man, you can be a good coach, but your results are what speak for you. And that part of it has been a really big failure for them this year, especially Bummer coming off of what I thought was a relatively good group as the year wore on last year.
Yeah, I would agree. And you pointed out Hopkins has struggled a little bit. Bojorquez has been really good for the most part. He has been flipping the field and doing the things you need. But, yeah, you can't. If you're struggling on offense, you got to get a lift somewhere, and that would be special teams. All right, so this is from Dogs by Nature. Best and worst case scenarios for the Browns the rest of the season. Best case scenario, 1, young players like DeJuan Jones, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Cedric Tillman play well enough to answer questions on the roster. Team shows effort and heart on the field instead of making business decisions, and as much losing as possible. Yeah, I don't know about that one, but okay. I get where they're going, higher draft pick. Worst case scenario, veterans late in their careers or on one-year deals prioritized over younger players. Team matches the fans' apathy with their effort on the field. Winning enough games to drop out of the top 10 in the upcoming NFL draft, but not enough to make playoff talk at least a possibility, which would require pretty much winning out. Yeah, I get the developing young players. The problem with that is every year is so drastically different. There's no guarantee that guys that are playing really well now are going to play really well at the beginning of next year, but you do have to do evaluations on them.
Yeah, I think you do, especially at positions of concern like wide receiver. Are you more? Does it benefit you more to play Elijah Moore rather than Jamari Thrash? Like, there are spots I would prefer to see some young players, but I think something that we have agreed about through this process is like they can't afford to revert to old habits of giving away football games. Now, maybe injury puts them in the position that they have to do that because they have no other choice. Maybe you're looking a little more at like Dallas's context or something of that nature, but they're at the point where I think the culture of the organization should be that we are prioritizing winning over everything else, which Kevin Stefanski echoed on Monday with it. He said, reasons 1 through 100 we're going at the last half of the season is to win football games. I don't disagree with that. Listen, I certainly think when you get to the like week 17, 18 area and you're looking at what draft spot you could end up ultimately being at, I think you can start to get into some of those discussions about does it do us any good to win this game, right? You can, and I've always said tanking doesn't happen from the players. It happens from those above them and the coaching staff and the front office, either holding guys out of the game or putting them in position to lose by just kind of being sly about it. But I think that coming out of this, where I stand pretty concretely is that, yeah, you really can't win. I don't want to say it's not impossible here. We've seen 1-5, 1-6 teams battle back to have a at 500 or above 500 record, but they need to split this thing in 2 seasons. I mean, they need to go out and win 5 ball games of the last 8 games, right? They need to be over 500 to push themselves into feeling like, oh yeah, we are pretty good when all of the elements around us are, not playing out the way that we put ourselves into a hole the first half of the year. Like when this, and that's a larger discussion that's been happening is about the quality of the roster. This is a team that's good enough to win when they stay out of their own way consistently, and the surrounding elements they do a good job of taking advantage of. So I just think that with the Browns' history, with some of these players on this roster, core players for a long time have been around some of that negative culture. They need to win. They need to win and let this stuff in the offseason, the draft pick stuff, solve itself. But I certainly think splitting this we're at 0-0 and trying to have a winning record the second of the year should be the goal, because you don't want guys who are, core parts of this thing in the future to get comfortable with giving away football games. I just don't think that's a place the Browns want to be anymore. And I don't think there's a quarterback in this draft who demands you do that. Now, if there was an Andrew Luck or there was a Joe Burrow or some of these others who have been, and I understand the results haven't been great for Caleb Williams or Trevor Lawrence, but you get why teams would do that. Like, there's not that guy in this draft, in my opinion, who sort of begets the decision to go that route. So I would prefer that they come out with the idea of we're winning every game the rest of the schedule and play that way and get some of those results, because I do think that if you're keeping everybody around for another year, it springboards you into this offseason and then can push you into feeling really good and confident again about your next year.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. Jake Burns, is always great stuff. Tell folks where they can find you.
Yeah, brownsfilmbreakdown.com. That's where we do daily work, newsletters, videos, podcasts. You can find them there. And then obviously we do stuff on social with Browns Film Breakdown is the handle on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and Twitter and all that fun stuff. So yeah, find us there.
Jake, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Jake.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Jake Burns, make sure you check him out again, brownsfilmbreakdown.com. Always really good film breakdowns and analysis relative to the Browns. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.